The history of American slavery is lengthy and complicated. It dates back to the early 1600s when European colonists started importing African slaves to the New World in order to labor on the plantations and establish the colonies. Slavery was a fundamental part of American society for nearly 2 centuries, with millions of individuals being forced to labor in horrific circumstances. During this period, African Americans were denied fundamental human rights and freedoms, and their tales of resistance, fortitude, and battle for liberation are still being shared today. This introduction will study the history of American slavery, from its roots through its final abolition and the impact it has left behind. In the early colonial era, slaves were regarded like indentured servants. During the early colonial era, slaves were regarded as indentured servants, meaning that they accepted to a contract in return for a specific amount of money. This contract would generally contain a period of servitude for a fixed length of time, usually ranging from 5 to 7 years. During this time, slaves were frequently compelled to labor in fields, dwellings, and other regions, and were not permitted to leave the property of their owner. Slaves were also often not given with any rights or any sort of remuneration for their work, rendering them open to exploitation and cruelty. Slaves were also typically subject to severe penalties for any disobedience or transgressions and were not permitted to hold any property or have any legal rights. The South before the American Revolution. Before the American Revolution, the South was a varied area with a mix of Native American, African, and European civilizations. The economy of the South was mostly dependent on agriculture output with small farmers and huge plantations. The colonial administrations of the southern colonies had a mixed relationship with Native Americans, and the African slave trade was a vital aspect of the region's economy. The American Revolution transformed the character of the South as the area saw considerable political, economic, and social development during and after the conflict. The abolition of slavery was a huge turning point. The abolition of slavery was a momentous turning point in history as it marked the end of a lengthy period of injustice and tyranny. It signified the beginning of a new age of civil rights and equality for all members of society. This transition has allowed individuals of all backgrounds to have access to education, economic opportunities, and the opportunity to vote. The abolition of slavery also gave a chance to go ahead and develop a more fair and equal society. The emergence of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was an era of social and political turmoil in the United States that started in the 1950s and continued until the late 1960s. During this period, millions of African Americans and other minority groups sought equal rights and opportunities by contesting segregation, campaigning for voting rights, and protesting discriminatory laws and practices. This movement is acknowledged for influencing subsequent civil rights movements throughout the globe and is one of the most significant events in the history of the United States. Right point of view about. Right point of view regarding the history of American slavery. The history of American slavery is an enormously intricate and painful one. Slavery existed in the United States from its earliest days and was a vital influence in the establishment of the nation. Slavery was a system of forced labor that permitted some persons to possess and benefit from the work of others. It was a system of tyranny and exploitation that had disastrous repercussions on African Americans. The legacy of slavery has had a lasting influence on the lives of African Americans and the country as a whole. It is crucial to understand the history of American slavery to better understanding the present situation of racial relations in the United States. In conclusion, the history of American slavery was a lengthy, terrible, and often ignored portion of our nation's past. It is a vital reminder of the injustices that our country has experienced and how far we still need to go. We may commemorate the heritage of those who were enslaved by learning from the past and working to build a better future. We must also remember that there are still many people throughout the globe who are afflicted by contemporary forms of slavery and exploitation, and we must continue to struggle for their freedom, justice, and equality.